May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, our God, our rock, and our Redeemer. Amen. For the last couple of days, Sue Colehep and I have been on a wild goose chase. We did this wild goose chase in Corvallis, Oregon, at the Benton County Fairgrounds. It was the Wild Goose Festival, a festival of justice, art, and spirituality. This is the third Wild Goose Festival. There have been two on the East Coast, and this was the first time that it was brought to the West Coast. And the wild goose is actually a Celtic symbol in spirituality for taking flight and for the beauty of taking flight. During the couple of days that we were there, we were privileged to hear voices that are very well known all over the country, and a few that are upcoming and very powerful. Our first evening we spent with Father Richard Rohr, and Father Rohr has been writing books for many, many years, and he is a contemplative, and he spoke to us about finding within ourselves of what is our deepest yes. What is the deepest yes? And I'm going to talk more about that in a little bit. But for me, it was, I have read probably almost all of Richard Rohr's books, and to hear him personally was exciting. It was wonderful. It was so cold on Friday night as we were out there listening to Richard Rohr, and I thought, oh, I should have brought my coat. So the next speaker, I didn't care who it was as long as it was inside. And so we went inside and we listened to Rachel Held Evans. Now, Rachel Held Evans is an author, and she is an evangelical woman who wrote a book called A Year in the Life of a Biblical Woman. And she took a full year to live out all of the rules, the laws in Scripture that had to do with women. Going so far as to, for 1 week, she would only do this for 1 week, call her husband master, because the Scripture says to do that. In Psalm 31, it says that the woman should, I just saw some women look at their husbands and go, that's great. But in Psalm 31, it says that the wife should shout her husband's praises from the gates of the city. And so she took out a sign and stood at the Welcome to Dayton, Tennessee sign and held up a sign that said, "Dad is awesome." She was very funny, and coming from a very conservative evangelical background, her life growing up was not to question. She was not allowed to read Scripture or do anything in the church. And then she had a faith crisis that said, oh, wait a minute, I don't think this is what the Scripture says. And that's what brought about this year-long living as a biblical woman. And her book will be out the end of October, and I have already ordered it. She's very funny. It was just delightful, and it was so warm inside that building. It was just great. So the next morning, when we returned, the first speaker that we were able to hear entirely through was Nadia Bowles-Weber. Now, Nadia is a young woman that has been invited to preach at the Festival of Homiletics. Now, for most of you, that's probably like, so what? For preachers, it's like, wow. Yeah, that's a big deal. And Nadia was quite the character. She is ordained in the Lutheran tradition, and she began a church in Denver, Colorado, and it is called House of All Sinners and Saints. She is described this way. She may be a leading voice in the emerging church, but nobody really believes she's an ordained pastor in the ELCA. Maybe it's the sleeve tattoos or the fact that she swears like a truck driver. And she does. Either way, she's fine with it. Nadia lives in Denver with her family of 4, where she can be found riding in the third person, chasing chickens around the backyard with her kids. Nadia's church, she said that she had to be in a place where she could be herself, where she could look the way she is, and she is tattooed almost everything that you can see, and talk the way she wants to talk, and to invite all of the sinners and the saints into God's world. And one of the things that stood out in my mind with Nadia, there are 2 things. One is, she said, I can be authentic in my congregation. This is who I am, take it or leave it. And she doesn't feel she ever has to be anyone but who she is. The second thing is that 4 times a year they have an invitation for people who have been visiting the church to come and hear about the church. And they do it at a luncheon where people who've been there forever and new people come and sit down, and they all talk about why they come to this church, what's important. And one of the things that she tells them is, what are you going to do when you get upset with me? Because I guarantee you it's going to happen. Are you going to stay here and stick it out with us? Or are you going to get up and leave? And she says to them, if it is your practice to get up and leave, then do it now. Because I guarantee you, I will upset you at some time. So either say, yes, I'm committed to working it out, or I'll help you find another church. Nadia is able to say whatever she wants, and the sinners and saints either stay or they go. But I kind of have a feeling most of them stay. We were blessed to listen to Pastor Barbara Campbell and Rabbi David Zasko. Barbara has a church in Portland, and Rabbi David's congregation meets on Friday night. And they suddenly realized on Good Friday that, oops, they both wanted the sanctuary. So they decided, and it was just so funny to see them talking back and forth, that they would do the service together. And Rabbi David said, my problem was that, the Passion narratives are not good to the Jews. And I was not sure that I wanted to be in a place where my people were going to be put down. And so Barbara started changing the scriptures a little bit, just a little bit, so that it wasn't anti-Semitic. And what came out of that, as they told their story, was such beauty. And Rabbi David gives classes on early Judaism to help Christians understand Jesus. And I would love for him to come and do classes here. And he was just amazing. So that was a wonderful spiritual experience to have with the 2 of them. We were blessed to listen to Bruce Rage-Chow, and he is a young Presbyterian minister who spoke to us about race. And does racism still exist? And he just a great job of talking about the things that we say that hurt our brothers and sisters. He's a Chinese American, and he said, he has had people come and say to him, well, I don't see you as Chinese, I see you as white. And what does that do? That says Chinese isn't important. Your culture is not important. He was terrific. It was really good. And another justice issue. We had the last thing that we list, second to the last, there was a panel. And the panel had Nadia, Richard Rohr, Brian McLaren, who was another big name in church theology, and a few other people. And they were talking about what if our response to 9/11 had been different? What if the day after September 12th, our response had come from a different place? And to hear, Richard Rohr talk about the contemplative, and trying to look inward as to, is our response coming out of our need and our desire to get revenge, or is it out of a justice place? Where is it really coming? And just to hear all these different voices, it was really interesting and thought-provoking, because it made me think of how we respond. Where are we responding from? And that takes me back to Richard Rohr and to the deep yes. I remember reading Richard Rohr years ago and him talking about the deep yes. And it was wonderful to be reminded of that again. The deep yes is that part of our spirit that we are most committed to. And it comes from the purest place, which would be God. And he spoke to us about how we can work for justice, but we can work for it from the wrong angle. We can work for justice out of our desire to be right, our desire to be powerful, and those aren't justice issues. Justice comes from the deep yes, to the place that God speaks. And Richard feels that you can only do this through contemplative prayer, the silence, and listening to God. And he said after 30 years of praying in this manner, he still has problems with it. It's hard. It's hard to take 20 minutes and say, I'm going to give this to God, because our mind does wander. And there are actually ways to help with that. But my question to you today to think about is, what is your deep yes? What is it that you would give your life to because God has called you to it? Not because you want to be right, not because you'll be more powerful or you'll be with the dominant culture, but where is your deep yes? I told Sue that as we were having dinner on our way home that my mind was just all over the place. I had intellectual here, emotional here, contemplative here, and peace and justice here, and it was hard to sort it all out. And I think the way that we do that is with the deep yes, is looking deep inside our souls. And what I came back with was a commitment to God to seek that deep yes, and to invite anyone who would like to go on that journey with me, that we will do that. And if we want to form a group, I don't know, the deep yes, or whatever, we can do that. Or we can email back and forth and talk about what we're going through. We can figure out ways to do that. It was a wonderful wild goose chase. And I only bought one book. Oh, it's a great book. Melba, you would love it. Rabbi David wrote it, and it's wonderful. So That is my challenge to you, is to search for your DPS. You won't find it today, and you probably won't find it tomorrow. It may take you a year or two of commitment to God to find that place that God is calling you to, that you can give your life to. This was a great opportunity to be with others who care for peace and justice and for spirituality. And as we are celebrating this weekend, Labor Day, it seems to me a really good time for us also to hear the words of our World Methodist Social Affirmation. Our discipline says that this should be read at least once a year and more often than that. And I would like to invite the choir to come up as they are going to help participate. You can read along or you can just listen to these words.